listening to the partial doctor for the Australs. I am here. I will be a church sponsor this morning, and my preferred pronoun is she. My parents Christian spirits to pronounce he, and being able to. The debate we have selected is that this House believes is that the Democrats should actively prioritise fielding minority candidates in investigating elections. To open the debate, we'll welcome Victor Burns to introduce the shooting.
The contradictions within the Democratic Party are so obvious and so clear that Jason, without his glasses, could see them. They are seen as contrary, as inconsistent, and as liars, and this will be the death of the Democratic Party if they do not put their money where their mouth is, if they do not capture the voters that they claim to care about, and if they do not start prioritising minority candidates. First, on setup, then what the current issues with the Democratic Party are, why this is good for the party in the midterms, and why this is beneficial in the long terms. Three things in setup. Firstly, who we think this is targeting. Obviously, we just don't think that Conservative voters are going to flip over to the Democratic Party anytime soon. This isn't about them. We also say that establishment voters who've been voting for the Democrats for 20 years are likely to continue voting, that is habitual, that is a party they support. This policy is to target disillusioned voters who believe the Democratic Party has gone back on its values, and that is who this policy is about. Secondly, while we are sending a message of identity, obviously we do not have to stand behind bad policy. We think we can have good identity politics, but also good economic policy. And lastly, I think to actively prioritise, this looks like between two candidates picking the minority one, this looks like if the whole field of candidates are white males, going out and actively searching for a candidate to run. Obviously, we cannot make this every seat, but we think lots of these seats will be filled by minority candidates, and obviously we are standing by good candidates in this debate. We don't have to support bad politics. Firstly, on issues with the Democratic Party, we think Obama had something special, something that the Democratic Party has lost. We think he had a clear vision for America that was both clear but inclusive of all minorities. We don't just think this was because he was black. This is because he supported things like universal health care. He supported things like ending the war. He saw a radical change that gave hope to America, and he stood out from the field of old white capitalists. We saw increases in voter participation. We saw ordinary voters, but people who were voting for the first time. We think Obama was important, and Obama gave America something to identify with. They lost that in the 2016 election when they put up Hillary Clinton because that was a mistake, and they lost the voters who believed in what Obama brought. We think that in doing that, it signaled that the Democrats were going back, and people lost a party who was speaking for them. Because frankly, they didn't buy what Hillary was selling, and in essence, her moves, as it got closer to the presidential election, closer to the right, people just saw her as a blue Republican, not a Democrat. We obviously think this translates, and the presidency has a major impact on the midterm. We need minority candidates then to bring that back. We think these issues are especially risky going into the midterms because, firstly, the midterms are far more about voter participation. Firstly, because there is less talk and less engagement leading up to the midterms. We don't rally people through large presidential campaigns. But secondly, the midterms themselves are not viewed as important because they don't have the prestigious title of president. But we think this is even furthermore risky because it gets in the way of the future president who is in office. You need the Senate and the Congress who elect in midterms to be able to pass policy as a candidate. If they fail in midterms and do not have that, any Democratic candidate in the future is undermined by the fact that they cannot do anything in Parliament. These are the issues that this solves. So, secondly, why this is good for the party in the midterms. It is very clear that the context that we are talking about is a Trump presidency, a Trump who attacks and vilifies minority at every available opportunity. And at that point, you can't expect people just to vote for us because they won't vote for Trump. We need to give them an active reason to. Because no, I think we all know that it is not compulsory in America. Voter participation is especially low. What we need to do is not just get people to pick the better of two evils, but to get people actively to come out on their Tuesday and vote for our candidates. We think they're obviously more likely to do this when we rectify the issues that I told you earlier, when we give them hope, when we give them someone they can identify with, when we give them a strong candidate who aligns with what the Democrats are saying. At that point, we think we claim two main benefits. The first is that we have clearly a better chance of capturing these voters. The Democrats, firstly, are seen as more trustworthy and believable because they are now in line with the principles that they claim to stand by. Secondly, we think we get a radical change to the face of the Democrat Party because at this point in time, a large majority of these voters are disillusioned and they are the same people who were being attacked by Trump. This gives a motivating support. But on top of that, at the point where they have someone to identify with, they are not just more likely to vote, but more likely to do things like actively come out on the campaign trail, do things like join on phone banks, and that gives us the ability to bring in more voters because that means that we have more support, more public pressure, and the ability to capitalize on the candidates that we are bringing. Secondly, we think image-wise, this makes the Democrats look far more consistent. At the moment, the Republicans look like a hot mess. They are, firstly, constantly undermining their leader. Secondly, constantly changing political policy, i.e. child separation, where they would like to separate them and then put them back and separate them. And thirdly, we think there are widespread rumours undermining the confidence in the White House. Comparatively, by putting up these candidates, the Democrat Party is seen as united and stronger and bringing unification not just within the party, but within America. And minority status aside, this presents a more consistent party that is seen as more confident and more capable of holding on to these seats. At the end of the day, this gets the Democratic Party more votes, and at that point, we should win the debate. But thirdly, why this is beneficial in the long term, we think likely candidates for the 2020 presidential election are people like Cory Booker, who is an African American. And for those people to get elected, we have to start now. Firstly, on this, we think that these candidates to look like token candidates. We don't want a mess of a party and say, oh, well, we have a fun minority candidate. What we need for these people to not look like tokens is for us to put up minority leaders now and to say, yes, we are invested in this now. Secondly, we think this prepares the voter base for those people's campaigns because we aren't wasting time. We aren't putting up a candidate then and then convincing them that we've changed the party line. By getting volunteers on board now, firstly, they're more likely to stick around, but secondly, they're more likely to stay because of consistency. We recognise that election cycles in America are long. We cannot wait until 2020 to make the necessary changes because firstly, we need to capitalise votes. Secondly, the Democratic Party needs to look consistent. And thirdly, for these candidates who have success in the 2020 presidential election, for them to be electable, for people to go out to the voting booth and support the Democratic Party in a way that they haven't since Obama, we need to start prioritising minority candidates. Proud to affirm. Thank you. Now, Jason, as I feel that.
What made policy contradictions worse, such that I could see them with my eyes closed, was fewer Democrats in Congress, messages that minorities were incapable of entering the halls of power, and even if they did, that they were unlikely to be progressive. What they had to contend with was that being from a minority and being a Democrat did not automatically make you progressive. I'd suggest they meet my parents. Even if they were elected, you were significantly unlikely to get good policy there. Two things I'm going to deal with in this speech. Firstly, how it is bad for the Democrats' electoral prospects, and secondly, how it is worse for policy. But first, a bit of setup. What do we prefer in opposition to their kind of minority favouring policy? We don't prefer a world in which white men are actively selected by virtue of them being white. We would prefer a world in which normal processes are followed based on like who is most likely to win, who has the best views, who is most consistent with the views of the party. First point, how is this bad for the electoral prospects of the Democrats? We think at the end of this, at the beginning of this, not the end, you are less likely to get elected under their side. This is not something that we should do because elections are so important. And as they tell you, the 2018 midterms, I don't know when they're happening, are the most important thing that we need to win to stop Trump's terrible policies. First reason why it is bad for electoral prospects, in that it alienates the white working class and powerful white people, of which we know there are many. The message that their policy sends is to say that your identity, your status of being from a minority, gives you authority to be progressive and makes you a better progressive, and that therefore you should be favoured when it comes to like selecting who should be fielded as a candidate. That reinforces to this like white working class, the working classes of like Detroit, unemployed because their auto factories closing. It reinforces that the Democrats do not have their interests at heart. It reinforces that their input is not seen as valid by the Democrats or is received with less value or derision. Let's point out that there is a huge group of people who feel like the Democrats don't know how it is to be white, but in poverty and suffering from America's loss of manufacturing. That is probably the reason why Trump won the last election. That is probably the reason why the Democrats are going to absolutely fuck up the midterms if you follow their model. Under our side, we claim these people for the Democrats, where they feel abandoned, especially by the Republicans' failure to follow up on their promises. Second reason why electoral prospects are likely to be worse, which is that their policy is likely to lead the favouring of a minority over an incumbent. To the extent that minorities are promoted, incumbents are likely to lose their position in favour of the person who is from a minority. The problem with that, firstly, is that people connect the most to long-term candidates. Why? Because they've seen them before. They've seen them do stuff in the community. They have a sense of who that person is, and they have a sense that they can engage meaningfully with that person and provide their concerns to that person. They've seen that incumbent candidate cut ribbons to schools. They've seen that incumbent candidate open hospitals. They've seen that incumbent candidate back you up when you have a shit fest at PNC meetings. The comparative under our side was a Democratic incumbent versus an unknown Republican. On their side, the Democrat had an equal disadvantage to the Republican who was not in the community at that point. Second harm of promoting minorities over an incumbent is that the incumbent is much more likely to be able to take a prominent role in House. They're much more likely to be able to be like the whip in the party. They're much more likely to have experienced respect and a high profile in the House by nature of incumbency. Thirdly, the unique benefit of that is that they already have connections and reputations. They've already made relationships with the nicer Republicans in the House. They're likely to be negotiated better. They're more likely to pass marginal legislation. And in a world where the Republicans are always going to oppose policies like Obamacare, being able to pass marginal legislation or prevent the passing of marginal bad legislation is an incredibly large benefit. Third thing under this point of why you're less likely to get electoral success is racism. Is the point that because the people that they propose, the minorities that they propose to put forward, are often not incumbents, or this happens in a context where the voting base is vulnerable to racist narratives because of Trump's inexperience and the context in which that happened, it is significantly easier to craft an, if not overt, at least an implicit racist narrative about the minority candidate who is running. You are much more likely to be able to prey, a Republican is much more likely to be able to prey on the internalized stereotypes of the voter base in saying that this candidate is less experienced and has worse credentials, and they do not have those experience and credentials. They're less likely to have those experience and credentials to challenge that narrative, nor the social capital by virtue of being a minority to challenge that narrative. At the end of that, you had less people to challenge incredibly regressive policies, which was so important in the upcoming election. You got messaging effects that minorities were unable to win elections, and you created and reinforced racist norms and perceptions. To the extent that their mechanism relied on disillusioned voters, we tell you that also swing voters exist, and we are more likely to affect those people. And also that the disillusioned voters that they talk about are much more likely to be people from Middle America, people like white factory workers of Detroit, who are unlikely to respond to what is going to be seen as an abrogation of the democratic process, to what they perceive as an abrogation of merit. And to the extent that their mechanism rested on increasing participation, that was reduced significantly when Democrats were seen as not trustworthy and believable, but cooking the books in favour of minorities. The context of Republican incompetence that they provide was precisely the context in which their model worked the least. 3 reasons why. Firstly, it conveyed an image of disunity. It conveyed an image that the Democrats were just as bad as the Republicans when it came to unity. Secondly, you had splits in the party when kicked out incumbents ran as independents or something. That ruined the perception of the Democrats, which was particularly bad in the context of that vote. So we thought that their model actually brought the Democrats closer to the Republicans, which they characterised as so bad, reduced the electoral prospects of the Democrats, which wins on that alone. But secondly, even if they get electoral success, why is this significantly worse for policy? We tell you that, firstly, that if you have less people in Congress, policy is worse. But even if you have people in Congress, we tell you firstly that minorities who've reached the top of the greasy pole are much more likely to be regressive. A few reasons why. Firstly, they're more likely to be able to get away with regressive policies in the norm of the party, where progressivism is derived from identity. They're much less likely to be called out by their colleagues for their regressive policies. Secondly, they are likely to be the most privileged of the minorities. They are less likely to appreciate the structural basis of racism or classism. They're much more likely to do things like blame the criminal, for example, because they are less likely to have come from an environment which was conducive not to blaming the criminal. Thirdly, in these circumstances, they had a significant incentive on them to distinguish themselves from the rest of their minority. Because they wanted not to be voted against by racist voters, they are much likely to distinguish themselves from the rest of the minority and be able to be less able to understand their experience there. Finally, their colleagues were much less likely to critique them. Even if these people were elected, the policies that they would pass would be much worse. Not only do they get less people in Parliament, but even if they get people in Parliament, those people were likely to pass patently undemocratic policies. That's why we were so proud to oppose.
Now let's call on the executive
The greatest disillusionment that happens at all
is when Trump gets up and calls Mexicans rapists, when people get up and call refugees criminals, when people get up and call women birthing machines when they're not, don't have a right to contraception. That's where the biggest disillusionment happens, is when you see the leaders in your society telling the people that matter that they don't have a place there and that they never will. These people look to the Democrats to represent them, to back them and support them. The Democrats fail every time they respond in silence. They fail every time they support a white incumbent. They are failing these groups. That is the biggest disillusionment that is happening in America. This side stands behind continuing that. Two issues in this speech. How, first of all, will impact their election prospects. Second of all, on how the party functions. The question I have for the negative team is that it is deeply unclear to me, as no mechanism was given as to how they are going to, when their policies are about taxing them, when their policies are about subsidizing things. It is inherent to the Democratic Party in the policies that they create. That is exactly what these disenfranchised whites want. It is absurd to claim that they could win them when Hillary couldn't. Quickly on their setup, important here, don't let them fool you when they say we'll just do the normal process and support who is most likely to win. Note these processes are often incredibly biased against minorities. They are standing behind supporting white incumbents. Two issues in his speech. How will it affect the election prospects? What did they tell us? First of all, they tell us the Democrats are alienating the white working class people. And it sends, they have two follow-ons from this. First of all, it sends them the message that you need to be a minority to be progressives. And second of all, it sends a message that Democrats don't know what it looks like. First of all, they mitigated their own argument when they explained that people who are politicians are likely to be privileged just because you are a white, like it is unclear to me why a white working class person would look up at a white billionaire and also see themselves reflected in them. They mitigated their own argument. But second of all, it was absurd to claim that Trump won because he related to the working class people because of his assault of the earth struggle. Everyone knew that Trump was a billionaire. You know what the change that Trump brought? The change that he made? It was the fact that he stood up and said, I am different from every other politician that you have seen. I will stand behind you and I will support you and I will create the change you wanted to see in America. He never claimed to understand what it's like to work in a mine, but he claimed that he could help them and bring the change that they wanted to see. They made no proper explanation as to why Trump was able to do this. I've just given you one. So that is why Trump won that election. It wasn't because he was seen as like a poor white person. Okay, what was the second thing they brought? Second of all, they tell us that you will lose. Oh, it's bad to lose. Oh, incumbent candidates will lose because they won't have votes and they're not as powerful and they're not as good. I just thought this argument was incredibly strange because first of all, we obviously won't get rid of the best politicians. Like we don't have to stand behind entirely having incumbents. Obviously, if they're incredibly strong Democratic leaders, we will just keep them. It was absurd to claim that we could have them. Second of all, it was absurd to say that the claim here is just that just because you're an incumbent, you don't have skills and you don't have networks and things like that. Obviously, in the process of becoming a politician and working up through the different levels of government, through going to functions and meetings and stuff like that, it was just absurd to claim that when you are just brand new to politics, when you enter the midterm elections, that argument didn't stand. But also, here is the reason why the current leaders of the Democratic Party are bad, and that's because they're comfortable and relaxed in the fact that they have consistently been elected for 20 years. There is no imperative for them to change the policies that the opposition wanted to stand behind. That meant that the current politicians that we see were never going to fight for the people they wanted to support. Lastly, they tell us that Republicans are playing to stereotypes. Note this is first of all contingent on minorities losing, and yet to prove that. Second, and also we've just seen the Obama win and things like that. But second of all, obviously Republicans will place to whatever they want to. If it is a white person up there, they will also play into that as well. Was unclear. What did voters want from the midterm elections? First of all, they wanted a change. I just implore you to reflect on how disillusioned we see Australian young voters are when they see these same people being elected, when they see themselves not reflected in that change. Times that by 10, that's what we can see in America, because people believe that politicians are all the same, that they are all lying to you, and you haven't seen any change in your entire lifetime. Why would electing another straight white man bring you that change now? That is what encouraged voters to go out of the voting group. That's what encouraged voters to go out and vote for Obama. It was hope for a future, a brighter future. Unclear how providing these same people that you have stood behind since the party has existed will bring that change. Second of all, and note this went unresponded to by Jason, is consistently. Currently, the Democrats are seen as an incredibly inconsistent party in tension with each other, because they're seen as a party that says they are behind identity policy, says that they are behind minorities, but then again, prop up white people all the same. That means people view the Democratic Party as snakes. They view them as establishment. They view them as a party that you cannot trust and that you cannot rely on. That means that they are inconsistent, and that is what will be, as Beth said, the death of that party. And lastly, and importantly, I think they very much understated the power of minority groups in America. Minority groups have incredibly powerful voting blocks. America's only 50% white or something. There are many, many electorates that are dominated by minorities. They just cannot use their voice because no minority person stands for them. We can get them out to the voting groups, as we did with Obama. We can motivate them to see themselves in their politicians. This was incredibly powerful and cannot be understated. That meant that we were giving voters what they wanted. It was a change. We were never going to win the loser races that Trump got. Trump didn't win the popular vote. It was this big. We just needed minorities to come out too. They didn't with Hillary because she was white, because she was establishment. We can get them to come out, meet that gap, and win these elections. So, second of all, on party functionings, I'm not going to give a lot of time to this. I just thought it was absurd to claim that but minority politicians wouldn't be good at writing policy and things like that. First of all, they tell us that they'll write bad policy because they're privileged and distinguished. First of all, my example is Cory Booker, grew up in the streets, worked grassroots campaigns into local politics. There are minority groups that have come from disprivileged backgrounds, but note, you must be comparative here. The comparative is an incredibly wealthy white person that knows nothing what it's like to be a minority. Obviously, this argument is incredibly full. Lastly, to splits in the party. This argument will only stand if they believe you should never change politicians ever, and you should always have these same people elected until they die. Obviously, change is important. It's absurd that they wanted to stand against incumbents ever. This argument is mitigated by common sense. Obviously, it's so clear to me that you will never believe in your system if you never see yourself in that system. You will never go out to vote. You will never hold your politicians to account if you don't see yourself in them. The opposition wants to stand by that being the reality for minorities across America. That's a tragedy. Proud to vote. Thank you. Now calling
Panel, America is racist. Trump verifies this on a daily basis. The people of the US verify this on a daily basis when they voted for Trump. I really told you this in the introduction. When you select minority candidates, you're going to get more racist narratives about why these people do not deserve to be there, and those racist narratives are going to undermine those candidates. Speaker, this is about ensuring that we can stop Trump's crazy policies as opposed to taking a principled stance. The Democratic Party should obviously prioritize candidates who are more likely to get elected as opposed to just trying to represent, as opposed to just trying to become more inclusive. I'm going to do two things in this speech. Firstly, talk about who's more likely to get elected, and secondly, talk about policy outcomes. Who's more likely to get elected? The first claim here is that it is beneficial for the Democratic Party because you are able to get a more united front. Note here, Speaker, we are not saying that we are not standing for any minorities to be elected. What we are standing for, is for the most qualified person to be elected. That means we still stood for Obama being elected because we said that he was the best person for that party. We're saying we don't stand for a minority just to be selected. But more importantly here, Speaker, we tell you that by selecting these minorities, as per outlined by their first speaker, you undermine the democratic process, which means that the Democratic Party faces more backlash because these voters feel like the Democratic Party isn't listening to them and they're more likely to be disenfranchised. The third thing we tell you is, again, obviously the most experienced candidate should be the one to be put up. And as we told you at first, the reason why we prioritize this the most is because most voters right now in the US feel disenfranchised by Trump. And they feel like that is because he's not experienced, therefore it is likely that they would vote for someone who's more experienced. They told us, or they never explained to us, why we should prioritize having a united party for it. We tell you that we prioritize more experience because we say that is something that leads to better outcomes. Secondly, their claim here was that you get more voter engagement because you have minorities. But Speaker, I think they really fucked up their model here when they told you that you would select minorities. Because that means you no longer have a pre-selection process where you have candidates going out and rallying voters in order to vote for them. You get people who are less enthused or care about the voting process because they feel like they haven't had a say. Under our law, at least, you get voters, or you get politicians who speak to voters, who ask them what they want, as opposed to presuming what they want. That leads to better outcomes under our side of the house, because these voters are more engaged. And more importantly, you have a whole nation who's more enfranchised, who feels more invested on the outcomes of these policies. Under their side, that never happens when you pre-select candidates, or you select which candidates should be chosen. It was ludicrous to say that these voters, or these candidates, would get more outcomes. The third claim here was that you do not gain white voters just because you're able to elect them. Speaker, I think this was the nuance of our entire point, and that is which. When you tell white voters that their views are less progressive, and when you tell white voters that their views are less legitimate, what you do is you alienate them from voting for the Democratic Party. And the reason why that is harmful in this debate, Speaker, is because Hillary literally lost her election based on the white voters that did not vote for her as opposed to Trump. And that is why they matter in this debate, Speaker. And it is when you have these minorities who are often alienating them and telling them their views do not matter, that is why that is harmful in this debate. The second thing to say here, though, Speaker, is this is a premise that their case also relies on. It is unclear to me why minority candidates would get minority voters as well under their side of the house. Under our side, we tell you that these white candidates, all these qualified candidates, are more likely to listen to people because they have that pre-selection process and they have that voting process where there are greater incentives to listen to the voter base. Their fourth claim here is that Democratic candidates are now going to be more relaxed and more comfortable because of the process. Firstly, Speaker, there is no guarantee that these candidates would be voted in anyway. We think that becomes much worse under your side of the house because these minority candidates know that they will be selected in under our side because there is that competition that happens. There is more incentive for these candidates to listen to voters and more incentive for them to be adaptable. But secondly here, Speaker, at the point in which these candidates continuously get voted in, it is clear that there is clearly some benefit to their policies, and at that point it is ludicrous to say that we should undermine the democratic process entirely and not listen to these voters. Their fifth claim here was that it is unclear that we should franchise minority voters. But Speaker, because of Trump, these minority voters are more likely to be franchised by the political system because they feel like they've let them down. At that point, it is clear to say that they are likely to vote in the first place. But as we told you at our first speaker, to no response, it is likely that often minority candidates would not be the ones that these minority voters would vote for, and that is for the simple reason. Often minority candidates are not as progressive as other candidates. And that is for the simple reason that, for example, there are some Asian candidates who do not support refugees, and that is not a view shared by all Americans or all minority candidates. At the point in which these more privileged individuals go through, because these are the types of candidates who are likely to be selected in the first place, you get a voter base who's less likely to vote for them because they think that these are people who do not support them. More importantly here, Speaker, this looks like these privileged candidates trying to differentiate themselves from others within their racial base. This looks like actively condemning black crime or actively condemning Asian tax evaders, etc. This is more harmful under their side of the house. It means that they want to separate themselves because they want to disassociate themselves with the harmful rhetoric and narrative that comes from the Republican Party. Clearly, it is much worse under our side of the house. At the end of this point, Speaker, it is clear to see, under our side, we get more qualified candidates who are more likely to be elected. Firstly, because these are candidates who are clearly more experienced and more qualified. Secondly, because they aren't exposed to the harmful rhetoric that they aren't supposed to be there and that they do not deserve to be there, which will serve to undermine their voter base. Thirdly, you get greater voter engagement because there's a pre-selection process which ensures that they go out to actively engage individuals, and you get candidates who are more likely to listen to them. At that point, it is clear to see that under our side of the house, you get better outcomes because you see more progressive candidates being voted in the first place. Secondly, then, what does this look like for policy outcomes? Amelia's only response here is that we needed to be comparative because a white person would be worse. Speaker, I'd like to think that most people, at the point in which they are being elected in, are somewhat aware of their privilege because others are going to critique them. At that point, they probably realize they're not the best informed to make those decisions and are more likely to listen to voters. The reason why that isn't true for minority candidates is because they feel like they're part of that minority base and therefore deserve to be the ones to have that voice. It makes it much harder for others to critique them because they feel like they're not part of that minority group and do not have the right to be able to critique that policy. The reason why that becomes harmful, Speaker, is you get less progressive policy under their side of the house because these minority candidates are the most privileged and are the least likely to listen to others. But under our side, at least, you get white people who are more qualified or the most qualified candidate who is willing to listen to others because they have been voted in and have the feedback process of that. At the end of this debate, Speaker, it's clear to see that America is still racist, and that is the reason why it is unlikely they would vote for someone who is selected in as opposed to the best candidate who's chosen by them. At the end of that, it's clear to see we get better policy outcomes under our side. Proud to vote.
Now call on the last sentence.
The suggestion that we ought not do this policy because the people of colour, the minority candidates we will find, will not be as good as politics because they're inexperienced and because they're not good enough to run candidacies was ludicrous and was the very problem that enforced the status quo we have now of continuing dominance of white people running for the Democrats. If the Democratic Party wanted to be one that represented minorities, that wanted to be a party that was not just a slightly different version of Trump, it had to take a stand and had to do that actively by making choices of the candidates it selected. We backed them to pick good candidates. We backed minority groups to be good politicians. I want to start by talking about the issues with the Democratic Party here. We told you that what Obama had was a difference and a uniqueness and a belief that brought people into the party in a way no other politician had before and no other politician had since. We heard no response. We told you that when he left, the Democrats also lost an identity. They lost the foundation to which their party stood for and a way that brought voters in, and they lost the voters as a consequence. There was no response. We told you that it was risky in the midterms because midterms were less popular, people were less interested, they were not seen as important, and we needed to get people out to vote, and we needed to motivate them more than ever, and particularly those voters we lost before. There was no response. What did they say? They said that all Americans are racist. I think that undermines the strength of a united group of minorities to get behind and outvote them in the way they did Obama. They ignored the fact that millions of people voted for Obama that did not vote for Clinton because she did not represent them. These candidates represent them. We also told you that I think they've also misunderstood the demographics of America. America is growing. In the next couple of decades, Spanish will be the most spoken language in America, not English. They ignored all those factors there, ignored all those voters. And they also completely forgot the outcomes of the 2008, 2012 election, where they did come out and they did win. We can win these elections. If the racists are angry, I think we're doing something right on the Democratic side. They then tell us that even if we lose, the last quick look is, even if, worst case, we lose seats now, we still think we're doing the right thing by being able to represent the people who currently have no voice and have no vote. But importantly, we are thinking for the long term and thinking for the 2020, 2024 election. And we want to be the party that gets ahead now and looks like one that is serious about this and not just jumping on the bandwagon far too late. The next concern is they won't be progressive enough. We would not select someone who does not agree with the Democratic Party values. That seems pretty obvious. The second thing is, what about the normal process? That picks the best candidates. Not sure about that one, because I think normal process, as Amelia tells you, entrenches those biases, entrenches those things. Simone didn't respond, she just doubled down and said it was correct. Amelia's analysis stands. They then tell us that Simone, they won't vote for them just because minorities won't vote for them just because they're a minority there. I think they have to be comparative here and probably more likely to vote for them because they represent them and they speak their voice here. But I think even if they don't support them, they still put that image to possibly inspire someone in the future. But I think more important, they are likely to represent them. They are coming from that shared experience. The reason they're putting their hand up and accepting our nomination coming into our party is because they see a pathway to change. They see a pathway through which they can actually improve the lives of those around them. I think it is very likely they'll represent them and very likely they'll be like that. And it is far more likely they'll do that than some other white person here. Simone tells us they'll be more likely, white politicians are more likely to understand the problems that minorities face because they recognize their privilege. Oh, well, problem solved, racism fixed. I just don't think that is true in America. I think the difference in lived experiences, the disconnect people have in communities and they live in different areas, the fact they never interact with these groups and they can never properly represent those people here. You did need to have other people from that minority group who lived in those experiences, like Cory Booker, who grew up on the streets, who understood how this environment worked in order to make that change here. They could just not let them work fix itself. It had not worked for decades. It wasn't likely to work in the future here. The next things we heard is from Simone is the white people will no longer vote because they don't see themselves represented here. I think the white people, a lot of people are likely to vote for the Democrats in the first place already care less about their race than they do good policy. So we're not trying to convince racists to vote for us here. They're unlikely to. The hard-on Democratic voters will always vote for the Democratic Party, as Beth tells you here. We don't think that's a massive problem here. We also think that if we lose a few because they don't see a white face on the billboard or the corporate, we think someone else will vote for them in that minority group and we'll make up for that there. The next big concern is about incumbents. What about the poor incumbent here? Obviously, we keep some. Those are the leaders. That's important here. But then it's the fact that there are hundreds of candidates for senators and hundreds of candidates for Republicans in the House and members in the House. There's also double the number of candidates for that. There are plenty of spaces for them to be there. But I think this is also a pretty obvious response, is even if every incumbent won their election back, we still would not have a majority in the House. There are still other seats to fill. We could at the very least fill them with that. We're going even more in that case today. We think it'll be successful. And the worst case, we lose some. That is okay. Politics is about change. It's about time people didn't feel like they were safe in their seats because they've been there for a while. We shook things up to prepare for the long term here. They then still have bad policy because they are disconnected from that. I think I've already talked with this. The big imperative, they're more likely to get here. They are the more privileged part of that. I think Obama was pretty well connected to the lower SES members of the community, despite the fact he went to college. And those are the things. I think we can do that in today's debate. So then the last time at first was they'll set norms that the people of colour will lose elections. That's continuing on losing. But secondly, we get in voters, and we think voters can understand the fact that maybe they lost because there are other barriers like racism. But it still sends the message the Democratic Party is willing to make change and is willing to support those people in ways they were not. So I think what we've proven there is that the issues of the Democratic Party are significant, and we need to fix them. This is the way to fix them here. But why was this stance importantly specifically beneficial in the midterms here? We told in the context of Trump, and importantly, that Trump was very racist in the campaign, but because the Democrats didn't put out a candidate that actively spoke against that, people did not vote for Hillary. They've shown and declared that they will not vote for someone just because they are not Trump. We need to give them a reason to vote. That was in Beth's speech. There has been no response. We told you we got voter volunteers and voters to come out because they saw the Democratic Party speaking for them. We told you that we're inspired to go out and campaign for someone who connected with them and someone who was part of there and someone who shared their message. There was no response. We told you that it made us look consistent when we had one party line here. I think there was some response, but it wasn't important. The risk of losing voters here was their major concern. And Jason says the factory workers in Detroit, what about them? I don't think they ever proved that the factory workers in Detroit are so disillusioned with Trump now that they'll change their vote away from Republican to Democrat at the moment. So they're likely to stay where they are. So they're not important in this debate here. The people who voted for Trump, the word disconnected, did that because there was policy behind Trump. There was a disconnect and they felt like he was different to Obama here. We think that that was why they did that. We think we can gain other voters on our side here. But what was the easier voter group to gain here? To try and run a white candidate, to try and win back the people who already voted for Trump or different steel policy, or to grab a group that voted for us once and then we forgot and told them we remembered them and told them we wanted to support them and we were here for them again. That was the easier group and better group to challenge in the debate today. Simone tells us that Simone then changes it and says the reason those disillusioned not because they are poor now, as Jason says, because they're looking for someone who's experienced in politics. What is this experience they're talking about, though? Every new candidate has no political experience because they haven't been elected before. They're local business people, community leaders, well-known popular people in that environment there. That's all the experience you need. Those who you pick there, we don't think you have some political experience, the reason they won't vote for them. I think the other reason they don't care about political experience is people voted for Trump here. So I don't think experience is the most important thing here. I think the fact that you connect with your community and you're a voice for your community and set up what your community cares about is the most important thing here. The last thing I want to finish on is in Beth's speech brings you a very important argument about the 2020 election. How the likely candidates are Cory Booker, Julian Castro, Elizabeth Warren, all minorities. And if we don't start the foundation now of saying we're a party for minorities, we are leaving it too late to fix that problem later. There was no response at all to this argument. I think for those three issues, we have won the debate.
It was deeply unclear to me why they thought that to get someone who seems new and fresh and purport to represent a disenfranchised group, you could just give minorities a person of colour and that would be enough for them. Because guess who didn't win the minority vote in the last election? It wasn't Ted Cruz and it wasn't Ben Carson, it was Donald Trump. Guess who looked fresh in the most recent presidential election? It was Bernie Sanders. The one thing they tried to stake all of their claims on was proving a mechanism they spent maybe 30 seconds asserting, which is that you need to be a person of colour to get voter engagement and to get representation for minorities. They never proved that mechanism, which means that without us even having spoken, they lose this debate. 2 questions in this speech, and maybe they'll listen to them because my voice makes it sound like I'm finally a white man on this team. Firstly, what is better for the people of colour who are already contending elections? I'll note here that these are the people they gave as examples for who is likely to win the next election. And secondly, who is disenfranchised and how do we engage them? They tell us in their first speech and also in Rob's speech that we want a person of colour from the Democrats to be president. A couple of reasons why it gets worse under their side of the house. The first is they set up an abysmal model at first in which they basically got rid of primary elections and selected people of colour for these roles. It's not how the American system works. It's not likely to be popular. But more importantly, it removes an important mechanism for testing how well candidates perform in primary elections. which was a mechanism by which we worked out who has particular charisma, who has the kinds of qualities that make them better to be elected as president. I'll note here that politicians tend to be pretty shit at judging this, in that people thought Trump's candidacy was a fucking joke, but he turned out to be really good at engaging with people in this way, and that is why he won. Second is it gives ammo to people to use against Democratic candidates who are already doing well under our side of the house. That means Cory Booker now gets mudslinged out in the election, in that we undermine the democratic process to artificially insert him into the election. He did not deserve his position. He only got there on something which undermined the foundation of American democracy in the primary election. But the third reason why people of colour are now less likely to win is your own party backs you less and is less likely to tap you on the shoulder for that role. Robert Amelia says, well, we'll leave the incumbent white people there because they're the leaders of the party. But what this doesn't give people of colour the chance to prove is that in a primary election, they can fucking beat that white person who's the leader. That's literally just what we've seen in Queens and in the Bronx in the most recent election. That is the reason why that person now walks into that room and walks into Congress with significant power. It's because she beat the person that they would have left in power under their side of the house. That is the future president, not someone who is artificially inserted in a way that is going to give Republicans ammo when they ever run for president. But we also gave you reasons why the kinds of minorities who are likely to be selected by internal processes are likely to be the more regressive Democrats. The first reason is because they're likely to be more privileged, because you need to overcome racial bias in order to be that accepted within your party. The second reason we give you at Simone to no response is you have an incentive to differentiate yourself from the kinds of people of your race that are consistently undermined by people in your party and by people in society. That looks like having black candidates who stand for being tougher on crime to prove that they themselves are not a criminal when Republicans get up and say that shit in debates. The third reason we give you at Simone, again to no response, is that you become more shielded from critique when your own party says the basis for you being there is your identity, therefore you are inherently valid as someone who has a progressive opinion. That means your white colleagues don't critique your progressive policies as much because they feel as though they no longer have a platform to do so. At the end of this point, the one thing that they tried to prove was that they might get a black president or black people into leadership, but they conceded they would leave white incumbents in the positions that lead to that. They conceded that they would shield these people from critique until it comes from the Republicans. They conceded they artificially assert these people into the debate. Next, looking at who is disenfranchised and how do they get voter engagement. This is the second thing they tried to prove by a mechanism that failed, but I'll deal with it anyway. Firstly, who is disenfranchised? We think this is white middle America who voted for Trump, not because they love taxes like they said under their side of the house. Being white doesn't mean that that's what you're voting for, but because Trump promised free and better Medicare, because Trump promised to reinvigorate manufacturing, because Trump promised practical policies that help poor people, including people of color, when the Democrats failed to do so. So how will this policy compound existing narratives about the Democratic Party? Note here that this is a lot of the reason why Hillary Clinton lost the election, because she undermined the voices of the kinds of people who would have voted for her, like white middle America, by saying their identity made them a racist and other people's identity made them valid. First thing it says is that your input is not valid if you are a white person and that you will be undermined in the Democratic Party because you do not stand for something. The Democratic Party says, we are willing to undermine a democratic process which is highly important to Americans, such as primary selections, in order to insert a person of color above you. That stratifies and ingrains the kinds of rhetoric which has fucked over the Democratic Party in the most recent election, because it says they don't care about you if you're white. That is the kind of rhetoric which Republicans are likely to jump on and say that there is sufficient proof that the Democrats don't care about your voice at all. The second thing they tell you is that they get voter engagement because you need a person of colour to engage voters. We would contend that this is not true. Donald Trump was able to do it fine. They just continually asserted, well, Obama did it and he was black. Obama had many other qualities, as they conceded at first. Literally their first speaker said, but no one was excited about Obama because he was black. It was because of his stance on healthcare. Yes, we can get white people who have that stance on healthcare too, but also the kinds of people of colour that they gave as examples as existing under our status quo who are in support of healthcare. Like Obama, it was unclear how that mechanism worked. The second thing is they skipped the process of a hard-fought primary election. That is a period in which you get significant publicity for your candidate because they're forced to campaign within that community. That is the reason why the New York Times has written articles on the woman who just won the election in Queens. The second is that race is not the basis on which you're representative, and it is offensive to say that you can throw out a black Hillary Clinton with the exact same policies and the exact same pantsuits and hope to win. That was untrue in this debate, and they just kept asserting it, thinking that they would stick. They conceded first that Obama won on healthcare, not on race. It was also clearly untrue because Trump was able to do it too. But also at the end of this debate, we thought a white Democrat was always going to be better than white Republicans who would otherwise win the white middle class vote. We also thought people of colour never became president when the Republicans got this ammunition. I have never been prouder to the game.
Speaker, the difference of Obama as an African American candidate was that he was the only one. When all Democratic candidates are of minorities, you undermine the good minority candidates from being elected, and you undermine and you stop the Obamas from being elected. And we'd much rather that world than one in which a white Republican is elected. There were two questions in this debate. Firstly, who is more likely to win elections? And secondly, who gets better policy? Note here, Speaker, the priority of the Democrats is to stop Congress bills from separating children and their parents, not just piss off racists. That means that in this debate, what you ought to prioritize is who is most likely to get the Democrats and progressive candidates elected. There were three claims made under this question of who's most likely to win these elections. Firstly, the first claim from side affirmative is that you want a united front for the Democratic Party. Two responses we gave you. One, note here, Speaker, it worsens under their side of the house because what their side does, which I think, as I've told you down the bench, is far worse than not having a united front for the Democratic Party. We told you under our side what was likely to happen was the most qualified and most experienced candidates would be the ones. Therefore, those with a united idea about what the Democratic Party would stand for. The second thing, though, here is it is unclear why this is a priority for the Democratic Party because we tell you we prioritize the ones who are most likely to be elected and the ones who are most likely to have all-encompassing ideas, which means at the end of that, it is clear that if someone does present a united front for the Democratic Party, they are likely to be elected. The second claim here was that now you disillusion minorities. Firstly, Speaker, minorities are not homogenous. Just because you have a woman, it is unclear why people of color would vote for that woman. But secondly here, it is, as I mentioned in the introduction and as we told you throughout our case, you you're less likely to be illusioned or enfranchised by people of color or by minority candidates. When all of them are minority candidates, it means it is seen as less of an anomaly and less of something to be proud of. But more importantly here, we tell you to prioritize good policy, and those are the outcomes that are more likely to enfranchise minority candidates. But the second thing we told you, which was unimportant, was the fact here that individuals are likely to prioritize those with better policy outcomes for them, which meant that just because you had a minority candidate who you thought was meant to represent you, you would still listen to those policies. And at that point, it's unclear to see why you actually disenfranchise minorities from voting. But most importantly here, and something they did not respond to, is the fact that you disenfranchise the white voting base. And that the reason why they are very important in this debate, Speaker, is because they make up a large percentage of the population. I don't care if Spanish is going to be the dominant language. This is about the 2018 election, not about the 2026 election. But more importantly for this, Speaker, when they feel like their voices are not represented, when they feel like their ideas are not legitimate, they're less likely to vote, and they are not going to vote for the Democratic Party. Which means at the end of this debate, this most important stakeholder, who is the biggest stakeholder in this debate, will not vote for those minority candidates because they feel like their voices are not being heard to. That means at the end of that, they're less likely to vote. But more importantly here, Speaker, something they also do not respond to, is the fact that when you pre-select individuals and you get rid of primary elections, people are less engaged with the democratic process, which means less people are likely to vote for the Democrats in the election. We'd much rather a world in which more people are voting. Secondly, then, who gets better policy outcomes? Note here, Speaker, their whole case was contingent on the idea that minority candidates would get you better policy outcomes. We told you 2 reasons why this was not true. 1, not all minorities are homogenous, as I said earlier. But 2, as we told you, often the types of people who are likely to get elected are the most privileged minorities, and people don't feel comfortable with being able to protect them because they feel like that person has been selected in and is the best person for that role, which means that ultimately you do not get that policy. Speaker, we'd much rather a world where you get a white Democrat over a white Republican, but we also prioritize a world where you get more Obamas, which is never going to happen under their side of the house. So proud to see it again.
The argument this team wanted to make was white people who have been represented since politics existed were the disillusioned ones we should care about because they were the ones who are now going to vote for a process that didn't change because they changed nothing in this debate. They kept saying, and that meant no disillusioned voters were going to vote because you didn't change the thing they were disillusioned with was consistent. Firstly, we weren't abolishing primaries. For a team who wants to mudsling like that, maybe try listening to my speech. We prioritize them winning the primaries. We weren't abolishing it. So, firstly, who gets more votes? They say we alienate white Detroit voters who weren't voting anyway. It was basically how they re-illusioned them. But we weren't going to get them anyway because the democratic values weren't in line with what they wanted, which we told you, which got no response. They say incumbents are better. We tell you again to no response if these incumbents are comfortable. And if those are the people who are prioritising, we're going to fix your policy that way. But we were probably going to keep the good ones. But also, even if every incumbent that they wanted to stand behind won, you didn't change the balance of power because they weren't a majority. They then do some more mudslinging and say that you undermine the candidates because you abolished primaries. And if they wanted to do that, then they had to listen to our model, which clearly, I urge you to look at your notes, didn't abolish primaries. All of that material falls out of the debate. But then they say that we gave no mechanisms. We gave you very clear mechanisms that this gave people something to identify with and gave people someone to believe in. It gave them someone who was not white and establishment and who had not been there for 20 years. At the very least, that was a better mechanism to get these people to vote than Trump exists. Because we told you Trump existed in the 2016 election, was calling Mexican rapists in the 2016 election, and they didn't vote then. Unclear why they would vote now. The next thing we hear is you don't need to be a minority to be fresh. We gave you mechanisms as to why that was the way you captured the minority votes, who was a large voting bloc. They were disillusioned because they never saw representation. We combated that. I'm just appalled at the lack of responsiveness of this team. Lastly, they tell you that Republicans would weaponize ID poll. They would do that anyway, as Amelia told you. But again, this was an argument for no minority candidates ever, and that was something that was probably not great to stand behind. I think the thing to note here is, despite all of that, what they needed to do to win this issue was prove, firstly, that we wouldn't get minority votes, which they didn't do. But secondly, they needed to not just prove that we wouldn't get minorities, they had to prove that there was a drastic decrease in the number of votes we already got. And considering we told you uncontested that establishment voters would continue to vote, that conservative voters weren't going to flip, we got far more minority votes than they would ever lose from disillusioned Detroit voters who were already not voting. At that point, we win the elections and this debate. But furthermore, on policy, they tell us that these people aren't experienced. Amelia tells you they gain experience in the process to no response. And secondly, that this is an argument against any new candidates. Again, no response. They tell you that they have an incentive to distinguish themselves from other minorities. And that was incredibly unclear, considering these were the minorities that they were going to win the election. Lastly, they tell you that they're the most privileged minorities. Obviously, we weren't choosing super conservative minorities. Obviously, you have to be comparative. And I think the most absurd claim from this team in this debate is that white people will be aware of their privilege in incredibly racist America. Their case was in tension. They didn't listen to ours, and that is what lost them this debate.
Thank you so much to everyone for
And you guys, I know.